Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Question is adoption of Senate Amendment 1 to Assembly Bill 40. Senator from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate that there is going to be some back and forth today, and we can actually have a good discussion about where we are as a state on this bad deal budget. We must listen to everyone and accept facts when we're putting together a budget, Mr. President, not just point to secret surveys put together by our special interests who fund campaigns and say that's good enough, or point to an obscure magazine that has a major donor on its board as being a reason to celebrate. We must look at the facts. We're 44th in the nation in private sector job growth. Last month's report showed that we had the most jobs lost in 4 years. And the Pew Center just came out with a report that shows that we are 48th in job growth. We are lagging behind our neighbors. And so we can't just bury our heads in the sand and say, let's just double down on that strategy and keep our fingers crossed and hope things get better. And at the same time excluding more and more people and creating backroom deals. Backroom deals are a bad deal for everyone in Wisconsin. It's a bad deal for Republican neighborhoods and Democratic neighborhoods alike. I realize that we, based off the comments from the previous senators, we're here to try and settle political scores from what happened in previous session. It only divides our state more, and it leads us further behind. Looking backward takes us backward. So we are here as Democrats to try and talk about moving forward. Spending more for less health care is a bad deal for all of Wisconsin families. Having the largest cut to education in our state's history in the last budget, followed by the smallest increase in per pupil spending in state history, is taking our state in the wrong direction. It's a bad deal for families. And trying to justify it in any other way is a celebration of mediocrity, and it's not the way we do things in Wisconsin. This is about our values. This budget is about values. It's about moving forward. It's not about celebrating mediocrity and taking us in the wrong direction. I'll give you a clear statistic from this budget. After the Joint Finance Committee finished its changes, Mr. President, we are now about to spend more money on corrections than on the UW system. What does that say about our values? This is a bad deal budget. We can't stand up here, and we shouldn't stand up here making excuses, rewriting history, and pointing fingers. That's not a way to lead. That's a way to take us backwards. Looking backwards and justifying bad behavior is not a way to move us forward. They started it is an excuse that kids give. It's not what leaders do. That's a horrible defense for this bad budget, as they started it. To put more policy in, jam that into this budget than Democrats did while they were here, and justify it by saying, well, they started it. Democrats, and to point at recalls and try to rewrite history. Recalls, Mr. President, you'll recall, were started by Republicans and Democrats alike. So it's on both of us. And so it's on both of us to try and move forward. So that's why I stand here trying to implore not just Democrats, not just speaking to my side, but to yours. Try and bring Republicans over. Democrats listen to the people of Wisconsin, Mr. President. We had twice as many listening sessions as the Joint Finance Committee put out there. We listen to people. We heard the desperation in their voices, people who were stricken with cancer and who were helped when they had access to Badger Care. And they weren't standing there to say, keep it for me, because I'm fine now. They were saying there to keep it for the next person, to make sure that they have access to that health care. So when they find a lump or they find a growing tumor, that next person has access to health care. That's the Wisconsin way. That's paying it forward. That's the forward in paying it forward. Democrats listen to the people. We put together a blueprint for a better Wisconsin, which we will put out there today in the form of our amendments. Earlier this session, we had the opportunity to hear from and meet His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Following his visit, I called for members of this body to remember his words of compassion as we address the many controversial issues extended to come before this body. As we began a new session, it was time to bring back a level of decorum that had been lost in the emotional, sometimes heartbreaking session before. And up until last week, Mr. President, the Senate had maintained that basic sense of decorum we'd been used to. Both sides had worked together to find compromise on important issues facing our state. I think many would argue the compromise we found was often better than the original proposal. I hope we can continue that today. As we begin our discussion on the state budget after last week's events, I hope we can stop and remember the speech we all heard from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He praised our democracy, and I am proud of our state's active citizenry who care about making the state we share a better place for the next generation and for the generation after that. He also spoke of compassion for your neighbors. In his book, he said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. For that reason today, senators across the aisle, you have an opportunity to do the right thing in following those words. We can show compassion for the less fortunate, for the next generation and for the generation after that, and for the sick and the elderly. Today we can provide the sick with access to affordable health care when they otherwise would go without. We can do that by accepting funds that are available to us and will cost taxpayers less. 100,000 more would be covered, and we'd be able to save taxpayers $120 million while we do it. Today, we can give our children the best chance at a better education and a better life, and a life better than our own, by investing in our neighborhood public schools. We can replace the unproven, unaccountable expansion of voucher schools with a true investment in our neighborhood public schools across the state. And today, we can return to a discussion on jobs and how we turn around Wisconsin from falling to 44th in the nation in private sector job growth and take us back to a point where we can lead. What we did last session is obviously not working when every state around us is flourishing. We must change course today. We must set sail in a new direction for Wisconsin's working middle-class families by accepting our 12-point blueprint for Wisconsin's middle class. While our debate today may be in vain, I realize that, I implore you to remember the words of the Dalai Lama. Remember his words for compassion for your fellow man, because as he said, the way we're born, the way we die is the same. In the end, we're all the same and deserve an opportunity to achieve a happy, successful life. As you passed in here to enter the chambers today, you may have noticed I brought something from home and put it in front of my door. My welcome mat. That's for everyone. If you would like to cross over and vote for some amendments that will actually help our middle class and actually move forward instead of looking backwards, instead of trying to point blame, find excuses for why things are done. If you actually want to move forward and join us in some of our amendments, my welcome mat is out for you. The blueprint for a better Wisconsin has 12 points. We'll have a lot of time to go over these today, but I wanted to give you the highlights. We're going to start off talking about job creation for Wisconsin's families. To turn Wisconsin's economy around from 44th in the nation in job growth, the middle-class budget must include job creation, workforce training that we had introduced previously. Second is to remove policy pork in the efforts to prey on consumers. We must remove the attack on the Center for Investigative Journalism and get rid of provisions establishing bail bonds in Wisconsin to make a stronger middle-class budget. Wide-impacting policy should have its own up or down independent vote independent of this budget. That's something that's not just Democrats have said, many Republicans have campaigned on. The third thing is to eliminate public dollars for private education. We must end the public education attack by expanding vouchers statewide and allow local referendums before implementation. Let's ask our neighbors what they want to do with education. Wisconsin needs to invest in the school system we have instead of creating a brand new statewide entitlement. Fourth is to end the public education deficit and restore the funds that were cut in the last budget. The fifth is to stop spending more for less health care coverage, to accept the federal funds to make sure our sick neighbors have access to health care that they deserve while saving $120 million. The next is to provide a true middle-class tax cut, one that benefits those who are struggling and working through Walker's economy, not those who are already wealthy and those who are already doing well. The next is to eliminate the Walker deficit. This budget steers us straight into the ditch of a $505 million deficit. We're better than that. Wisconsin must balance our budget the same way middle-class families balance their checkbook. We must also end the no-bid fire sale of state property, remove the ability of politicians to sell off Wisconsin's assets, like UW dorms. We must move forward, remove that provision, and preserve our heritage for the next generation. The 10th is to reverse the financial aid failure, providing higher education students financial aid relief to strengthen our state's economy. The 11th is to end the environmental hazards in this budget, restore stewardship funds that had been given to us from the previous generation and make sure they stand for the next. The last is to end the big government mandates that are in this budget. Local control should be important to both parties, not just to Democrats. And I would hope that Republicans would join us in standing up for local control and stop forcing local governments to comply with big government rules that only stand as a case for political retribution. So with that, Mr. President, I look forward to debating this budget and seeing if we can find support in a bipartisan way to move our state forward. It's time to stop pointing fingers. It's time to stop saying you started it, or he started it, or she started it. It's time to say, all right, Democrats and Republicans, let's join together. Let's figure out a way to move forward. Let's end divide and conquer today. Let's unite and move forward with a budget and a blueprint that puts the middle class first.
Question is adoption of Senate Amendment 1 to Assembly Bill 40.